Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Greetings, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
So spring is here and spring is nice. A lot of sunshine. We are still having a pretty good stretch of dry weather. A few days ago, they did say that we were looking at about a week stretch of dry weather in the state. So I know that's probably not true for everybody, but for a lot of people it is. And I know this is this is the weather we want in May, like with the dry. You know, a lot of people started mowing already. I did not, Karen. So be proud of me there.
I am proud of you. I couldn't keep my husband from it though. So
it is a little early. There's a reason why you shouldn't mow right away, and some people just feel the need to mow when things are uneven. But you got to remember, those grasses just burned up all the roots to put up those leaves, and they need to replenish. So if you shave them off, they're just going to keep shaving the roots. So just a little short tidbit on that.
Yeah, and mow a little taller in the spring too.
And mow a little taller, especially early on too, because you have to let them rejuvenate those roots that they just used up to get that first flush going.
Exactly. Yep.
But, you know, these beautiful days, last week, we actually had a pretty nice plant propagation workshop in which we talked about pawpaws, germinating them from seed, which is what I've been doing a lot of. We talked about hardy fig production in Ohio and some of the research that has been done at Ohio State. And we also talked about kind of a novelty concept that I bet many listeners probably are not familiar with. And if you are, well, you're keeping up with the novelties. But we talked about grafting tomatoes. It's just something that I think has gained a lot of momentum in the past 5 years. You know, typically when we talk about grafting, we talk about trees. In this case, we're talking about tomato plants. So just, you know, a one season graft, and there's a reason for it. And a lot of it is because of that cultural practice that we talk about with variety selection. There's a reason why we use certain varieties, performance and disease resistance and such. But with grafting, you're able to kind of take some of those aspects and put them into some older varieties that you might really enjoy. But we had a really nice workshop in Edina, good old Edina, Ohio.
But yeah, being able to graft onto a vegetable crop like tomato that does suffer from many different diseases is really great opportunity for small growers even to increase their disease resistance and increase their production so that they can have a better looking tomato on their dining room table.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we graft typically is when you want to clonally propagate something. You want the genetics to stay the same from one plant to the other without planting seeds. A lot of times when we talk about tomatoes, that's not a problem because you have true breeding varieties, right? So the seed of that plant that's more than likely self-pollinating is going to be the same as the parent, but a lot of times it's not. So one of the ways we get around that, you know, when we talk about fruit trees, for instance, is that we graft. But, you know, it's kind of a strange concept when you're thinking about that. If we have the true breeding varieties of tomatoes, why do we graft? And Karen was right on. Older varieties that are kind of out of date because we've just had a lot of disease pressure. Our agricultural practice is a little bit more intense, and we don't utilize them as much because they just don't hold up to machinery. They don't hold up to diseases that are out that are more prevalent now than maybe they used to be. So they just kind of get put on the side burner, but a lot of people really like them. So specifically, when we talk about diseases, you know, there are things like verticillium wilt. There are fusarium wilt, both of which, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, are vascular tissue diseases.
Yes, vascular diseases.
Yeah, so verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, alternaria stem canker, septoria leaf spot, tomato mosaic viruses. Now, that's a whole different ballgame right there. So these are all diseases that we actually have varieties that have a lot of resistance to them. When we talk about some of the heirloom varieties, well, they don't have a lot of these resistance. And what that translates to is just more problems when you're trying to grow them. More practices that sometimes are just either aren't enough or just too much of a hassle to get a nice tomato from. So when we talk about disease resistance, we have varieties like Better Boy. They have a slew of disease resistance. Celebrity is another one. And these are going to be the medium to large pink red fruits. Another great one is Big Beef. We see a lot of that one out there because it's very good to grow. Not to be confused with the Beefmaster, which is a little bit more of a late season variety, but again, great disease resistance, which means good performance. Lemon Boy, if you're interested in medium to large yellow fruits. The Small Fry, if you are talking about small fruit, so the cherry tomatoes. So it's just a nice thing to have. Now, what if you do like the old varieties and you just don't have success with them because all the disease pressure that's out there? If you can take a rootstock, now I'm going to give a little bit of terminology. So when we talk about grafting, we're talking about it's a cultural practice again, and it helps control soil-borne diseases, improving abiotic stresses, tolerance, and enhances crop yield. And it does so because it takes the genetic of one and puts it in another without altering the genetics of the fruit. So here are the two parts. We have the scion and the rootstock. And Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so the scion is the plant that you want to reproduce. So it has the fruit that you want, the size, all of the characteristics that you really like. So the scion is the part of the plant that you're trying to keep, right? Your rootstock, on the other hand, is a plant that has your disease resistance, your stress tolerance. They have good, strong root systems. And so when you're looking at your adult plant on what you want, you're going to want the scion because that's going to give you the fruit you want, but your disease resistance and things like that, that comes from the different rootstock. And when you're looking at combining your scion and your rootstock, it's very important to make sure that they are almost identical in size, because remember, when you're looking at plant tissue, you have the vascular system needs to line up. So you're basically taking one stack of straws and setting it on top of another stack of straws. And if your straws are off kilter because they're different sizes or they're not angled properly, then you're not going to get a good connection. So you want to pay attention to that because your meristematic tissue, or the tissue where growth is going to come from, you want to make sure that those growing points are connected, because that's how you're going to get those two plants to connect and reconnect together.
That's exactly right. So I like to think of it like this. You got the scion, which is the top, and the rootstock's the bottom, right? And if you forget, just the roots grow on the bottom. So that's where your rootstocks
Well,
are.
yeah. But the scion, like if you hear someone referring to the scion, that's from the plant that you want to keep. And it doesn't have to be a big piece of plant either. It can just be a little tiny start. 1.5 centimeters, I think, is the minimum size you're looking for.
Honestly, you just want the plants to be comparable, right? What you need some growth on them, because you got to have like a root structure for the scion to then be able to graft onto it.
Mm-hmm.
But you also don't want a plant that's really old, because, and this is something that we find a lot with plants, is plants can tolerate stresses better when they're younger.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out the kids again. Kids are more flexible. They heal more quickly. Young plants are the same way. And so you want to make sure you're using a younger plant. Typically, if you're doing your own starts or you're buying them, look for something that has 2 to 4 true leaves, not the cotyledons, which are the leaves that first emerge from the seed, but 2 to 4 true leaves. And that should give you about the right size of where you're going to start from.
Yeah, and I think that's about a 6-inch plant, maybe a little bit higher, 8 inches. But you want those plants to be comparable in size, both the rootstock and the scion. So we're talking about 2 plants. And some of the best ways to do that is, and this is what we learned in the workshop, Karen, you just plant seeds 1 week, and then you plant seeds the second week, and then you're planting both your scion variety, and your rootstock variety. So you're planting on separate trays, right? So you do 1 week, 1 week. Second week, you do it again. Third week, you do it again. And the reason for this is, when we're trying to match those straws, like Karen was saying, that's a really nice metaphor. You want them, they're not necessarily going to grow at the same rate because they're different varieties. Mm-hmm. They might have different germination times as well. So if you stagger it by a week, what you can do is you can start matching up the sizes pretty good.
That's a good idea.
You can start a lot of tomatoes, but plants need room to grow. So it's not a bad idea to start more than what you need, and then you can put the best in your garden.
Yeah. About 2 to 3 weeks will give you a stem size of 1.5 to 2 millimeters, which is about the ideal time to graft them.
Yeah, we're not talking huge plants, but we're not talking about little seedlings either.
Yeah, they need to have some good strength to them. You want a stem that is pretty hardy, can stand up on its own, because you're going to put it through a pretty significant amount of stress. And so you want to make sure that you have good, healthy seedlings. They're not all leggy. And so if yours are pretty leggy, you need to maybe get your light a little bit closer to the plants as they're starting so that you get a more solid stem.
Yeah. And there's plenty of information out there too on the techniques on how to do it. One of the things that you might want to invest in if you're interested in this kind of thing is there are these special little clips. And this is kind of a nice thing because you're basically going to, once you pick out your two varieties, and I'm just going to give you an example of two varieties that you might be able to find easily out there is, let's say, the big beef, right? I told you the big beef has a bunch of disease resistance already bred into it. And let's say you got those heirloom seeds that you really, really like. They're different. So you're planting your big beef and your heirlooms at the same time, probably different trays. Make sure you label the trays so you don't make it go backwards.
Yeah, don't think that you're going to remember either. You won't. So make sure you label it. It's really important.
It would be a lot of work for the worst combination, I think. If you get them backwards, you get the worst of both worlds, at least from what's desired.
From your objectives.
And your objective, right. Yeah. So make sure you label them, right? Make sure you grow them staggered. We're talking about 1 week apart. If you wanted to be a little bit more diligent, you can plant them every 3 days. Just what works. We recommended to start with a week. And then if you need more, then you'll figure it out as you go too. And you might, depending on the varieties, because like we said, they behave differently. But let's take the big beef variety. Actually, this route might be even a little cheaper than buying rootstock. You can search for rootstock out there, and the rootstock will have a list of disease resistance that it can provide. But if you can't find it, or if you find it a little too expensive to do this kind of stuff with, buying seeds from a tomato variety that's really disease resistant essentially gives you something similar.
Right. And we recognize that ideally you'd have had these started, a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. But we're working from, what people are doing right now and programs that have going on. So we recognize that if you are going to do this grafting and you're going to start them yourself, you do want to get them started a little bit earlier in the year, especially if you're looking on a production cycle. But that doesn't mean that you can't maybe do some experimentation with plants you've already got started just to see if the grafting takes, just to give it a shot and see if you can get the plants to survive and maybe learn a couple tips for next year when you're going to go at this, full scale.
I mean, Karen, I'm looking at this over here, our famous West Virginia garden calendar, and it's saying like by the end of April is when you should be seeding for transplants, and you're not going to be transplanting them until late May.
You're so right, because here I am in my head, I'm thinking about high tunnel producers, and that's not everybody. Yes. Yeah. For outside, yes, we're on track. So,
whether you get your plants in May or whether you get them early in June, it's going to be okay. Heck, even if you get them in mid-June, here's the thing. You'll find yourself battling more weeds if you delay plantings.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a good weed control program, or if you're transplanting a little larger plant, a lot of times you're ahead of it. So right now, I think we're still on schedule. Don't feel like you have to rush out there, but I guess the sooner you start, the better.
Right.
Because again, less weeds to combat.
And we also have to keep in mind our frost-free date is still at the end of May, right? Still May 21st, or sorry, May 20th. It moved up one day. But we still have that frost-free date. So you don't want to throw your tomatoes out there. Tomatoes and peppers are heat sensitive. They're warm season crops. And so even if you're growing them inside, they're subject to chilling injury where, if your greenhouse or your high tunnel drops below 41 or 50 degrees, the next day, the leaves can actually look like they have been diseased or damaged. You can get, it almost looks like spider mites have been in there, and you can get this mottling necrotic lesions inside of between the leaf veins. But that is connected to that chilling injury. So if you have some tomatoes or peppers that are started and you maybe have already got them out in a greenhouse or a high tunnel, and we get a cold snap, it's been getting down. We've had frost every night, which typically you're, still probably going to be over 50 in your greenhouse. But if you have an unheated high tunnel or something and you get your plants out too early, and let's say, we get that late frost in May that really drops temperatures, then you could see this chilling injury. Now, most of the time the plants will come out of it. It just looks kind of funky for a while. So don't panic.
Exactly. The frost comes when it comes, and just because it's 80 degrees today doesn't mean it's not 25 degrees tomorrow morning.
Yeah. All right. So when you're looking at, to get us back on track here, since I derailed us, I'll try to steer us back. When you're looking at doing your grafts and you've got your 1.5 millimeters, so, max size of 3 millimeters, you've got your plants there, you've matched up your straws, and you're ready to get them connected. But when you're looking at grafting trees, you're using a really sharp knife. When you're looking at grafting tomatoes, you really, really need a sharp implement because you don't want to crush any of those straws. They're super duper fragile straws. Consider them made out of tissue paper. And so you got to be really careful when you are slicing them. So get a fresh razor blade. And that's going to be a really good way. And you don't want to set it down like on a cutting board. You want to hold it up to do the cutting. So again, you're not allowing any opportunity for those straws to get crushed.
Exactly. Brand new razor blade. I mean, those aren't huge expenses. Make sure it's really sharp. And then instead of putting downward pressure to crush and then slice, just keep slicing. Make sure you're cutting through the straws, like Karen was saying, or the vascular tissue, whatever you want to call it, so that they remain open and you can put them together. So there were two different ways that we did the cuts. One is just a simple angled cut. And imagine you're cutting this at an angle in one plant, and you want to make sure that you have the same angle in the other plant. The reason to cut at an angle is because what you have done is you have increased the surface area that you can match up that vascular tissue with. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're making a cross cut, maybe at like a 45-degree angle. It could be off, but you're basically going diagonal so that you can expose as much vascular system as possible. And then you're actually able to do a similar cut on the other plant and match them perfectly so that the plant looks like, ideally, you want it to look like it hasn't been cut at all, right? So you're cutting two things the same way and you're putting them together. And for tomatoes, because it's a very soft tissue herbaceous plant, this case we're talking about those 6-inch seedlings with 2 or 3 leaves, true leaves, and tomatoes have compound leaves. And once you match it up, you just put this little plastic clip on there, and then the plant's going to have to recuperate. So at that point, you want to put them in a high humidity chamber. I mean, you've cut the plant, you've removed a bunch of leaves. The threat for drying is very high. So you want high humidity environment. You want to have that clip so that everything's secure. And you want the plant so that it's not going to have issues transporting the water from the roots to the new scion. Because I know we can be good, but we're not going to be perfect, right? And we have cut this plant, and matching that vascular system is never going to be 100%. So it's going to have a deficiency in the transportation of water from the roots to the scion until it heals.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that clip to hold the plant in place to match that vascular system. And you put a dome over to create high humidity. So if you're doing this in a tray or a bowl, you put a clear dome on top. And what that'll do is that'll keep that high humidity there so that the plant isn't just going to dry and flop and die. When you're first doing it,
you want to put the newly grafted plants in a 85 to 95% humidity for 48 to 72 hours. And then you can give them a more spacious place for a healing chamber. But you do want to make sure that you're not allowing the temperature to fluctuate very much.
Just another stressor.
We want to make it not too hot. If we get a super sunny day, make sure you open it up and keep it from getting too hot. But yeah, you want to definitely keep them covered and mist them.
Yeah, so just a few days then. And as it heals, you're not going to need that dome. But what I learned about those little plastic clips is when the plants heal and they start growing, those clips are designed to just fall off.
Mm-hmm.
So that the plant's not growing into it. It's not inhibiting the growth, and it's not going to cause damage. So it's a nice little thing.
Yeah, and you actually got to, resist the urge to take them off because you think that they're going to cause a problem. Because if you do try to take them off, you could actually break that graft union. So you want to let it fall off on its own, and, the tomato will be fine. So these clips are designed for that. You can make your own clips out of some like fish tank tubing, but you have to make sure that they're really small so that the plant can be strong enough to push them off as it grows.
Yeah, and we're talking like these little plastic clips. I don't foresee that as a major expense either. So, they're disposable because you want to make sure you're working with as clean condition as possible. And working with plants, if you have soil, you're not going to be sterile, but you can be clean, right? And you want to be clean because you don't want to introduce any fungal soil-borne issues directly into the vascular system, because even though that plant might be resistant at that level, I don't think there is resistance.
No. And for those of you out there who smoke or use tobacco products, this is a very dangerous game for you because tomato mosaic virus could be on your fingers just from smoking a cigarette. And so when you go in to work with these plants, you want to make sure you've washed your hands very well, that you have covered your clothing. If you are, smoking and you have a long sleeve shirt on, put something over top of those sleeves so that they don't accidentally brush up against the plants. And even after you've washed your hands, you're going to want to use gloves because once you introduce tomato mosaic virus, it is going to spread like wildfire through all of the plants. So it's really critical for those of you who do use tobacco products to be especially careful about sanitation and cleanliness when you're working with tomatoes.
Exactly. So let's just kind of recap the show.
I want to talk a little bit about the humidity. You were talking about leaving the dome on, and it is critical after 2 to 3 days. You do want to take that dome off because if you keep the humidity high for an extended time, you'll start to see adventitious roots grow on the scion. And so if you have roots coming at the scion, you'll want to very gently pinch those off, but that is connected to the increased humidity levels for a longer time. So you may have a little bit of wilting up top once you take that dome off, but that's okay. Just get some ambient moisture whenever the humidity starts to drop. But increase your light, increase your airflow really gently, really slowly so that the plants can make those adjustments. But if you are seeing adventitious roots, that is connected to, or on your scion, that's connected to too much humidity. So you're going to need to drop it down a little bit.
Yeah, because you don't want those roots. You want your rootstock roots.
Right. Yeah. Because if you let those roots grow, that's going to just take all of your disease resistance. And as soon as they touch the soil, then that disease has a route into the plant. So don't let those adventitious roots grow down. Pinch them off really gently and keep going.
Yeah, they're like, at that point, they're not adventitious roots, they're disadvantitious roots. Yeah, but it's fun. Novel ways of this takes breeding to a whole new level, right?
Oh yeah.
You're taking the best disease resistance and you're putting it on whatever you want to. So you can take those, I'm going to put it as in air quotes. Can you see that over there on the radio? The easiest to grow, right? Because of all the disease resistant, and you can put it wherever you want. So a whole new level of breeding.
All right. So let us know if you try this. We'd love to hear your feedback as to whether or not you gave this a shot and what your results were. So take care, have fun, and grow something. Hey friends, we need your help. In order to help keep this show going, we need to hear back from you. Please take some time and check out our evaluation. You can either contact us directly for a copy, or you can go online to https://bit.ly/ here's the tricky part. Capitalize the next 3 words. Extension, calling, evaluation. Again, extension, calling, and evaluation all need to be capitalized. So bit.ly/extension, calling, evaluation. Give us your thoughts. Let us know if you like the show, and especially let us know if you've used any of the information you've gained. Once again, you can reach us directly. You can call Karen at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673. Or you can reach Dan at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.